My name is Kylie DeClue, and I'll be talking about new ways to reuse plastics, like converting plastics to energy. So, a growing concern is the plastic crisis, that plastics are being found in landfills and oceans constantly, and it's a growing concern. I'm talk about a little bit about what happens to plastics that are recycled and what has happened with China and the anti-pollution campaign that's going on. I'll also talk about ways to improve the long-term uses of plastics and some of the solutions for the plastics crisis that we're in, such as waste-to-energy facilities and what pyrolysis is. So, some of the current challenges that we face is that plastics are not being recycled like they should be. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, only 9.1% of materials that is recycled by Americans in 2015, and that 3/4 ends up in the landfill or in the ocean. And so the waste to energy facilities that we do have only combusts about 15.5% of that plastics that is recycled. And so, with the world becoming more dependent on plastics, and especially hard to recycle plastics, it's becoming an increasing issue that we're having too many plastics, too many wastes, and not enough to handle that amount. And another really big challenge is that China has now shut down collecting plastic waste internationally, and they've decided to forego collecting any of those imported wastes. And so the US facilities that are doing the waste to energy, leading the pack, are only achieving 30% recycling rates. And so the question is, what happens to recycled plastics? Well, this video will show you a little bit about what happens.
Eternally. But Bottle 3 is spared the cruel purgatories of his brothers. A truck brings him to a plant where he and his companions are squeezed flat and compressed into a block. Okay, this sounds pretty bad too, but hang in there. It gets better. The blocks are shredded into tiny pieces, which are washed and melted so they become the raw materials that can be used again. As if by magic, Bottle 3 is now ready to be reborn as something completely new. For this bit of plastic with such humble origins, suddenly, the sky is the limit.
So basically, this video shows that the plastics that are recycled are collected and sent to facilities where they compact them together, grind them up, melt them, and repurpose them to either different materials or different objects. So some of the recycling rates around the world shows that the US is definitely not leading the pack by any means. Actually, US is more towards the bottom. Austria and Germany and Taiwan are the people that are ahead of the game. They recycle above 60%, while Singapore, Belgium, South Korea all recycle kind of half of the amount of waste that they get is put towards recycling versus going to the landfill. Following them is United Kingdom, Italy, France, and US and Austria, who all recycle in the 30% range, and then Canada and Japan shortly following us in the 20% range. So the question is, why don't people recycle more in the US? Well, it becomes very difficult in some areas where it's not a priority in the community. And so when something is difficult for people, they tend to not put as much effort into finding solutions, so they just throw it in the trash. Another big issue is that contaminated recycling loads don't get recycled, they don't get separated. If there's a certain percentage of contaminants in that load, it causes it to be discarded into the landfill instead of being recycled. Also in the US, there's no incentives for recycling. I know in a lot of places they will either upcharge for the use of plastics, glass, or metals, or they will pay you to recycle, and the US has not implemented anything like this yet. Also in the US, it's very cheap to send items to the landfill, and so obviously if it's cheaper, that is what we're going to do. This diagram on the right kind of shows what different countries do with their waste and how they recycle. And so as you can see, Switzerland, Austria, and Belgium all have very high recycling rates, whether that's mechanically recycling it or energy recovering recycle, while France and the US, most of it goes to the landfill, which is very unfortunate, but a sad truth. So another big question is, does the recycle that we separate actually get recycled, or does it go somewhere else? Well, according to the New York Times, after China closed its borders to importing foreign garbage, all material being collected curbside doesn't have an easy home. We have basically too much plastic and not an efficient enough way to recycle them. And so China refused import scraps as part of their broad anti-pollution campaign, and so the US does not have the resources or the manpower to deal with the amount of garbage and recycle that we have. We sent most of it to China, and now that we can't send it to China anymore, we do not have a way to process the amounts that we have. And so Pete Keller, he's Vice President of Recycling and Sustainability at Republic Services, agrees that most recycle is being put into landfills purely because they haven't found another substitute for the Chinese market. And so that's kind of the big issue right now, is to look for a sustainable way to recycle all of these plastics that we now have. A little bit more on this anti-pollution campaign. At the beginning of 2018, China put this anti-pollution campaign into effect, and they refused all foreign waste. Before the ban, the US would bail unsorted plastics that didn't have the manpower or the resources to kind of go through and recycle properly, and we would sell it to China. So China received about 10% of recycled plastics from the US per year. That amounted to 700 metric tons of plastic that we gave away and didn't have to deal with, that we now have to deal with because of this ban. And so China banned 24 categories of scrap materials, including plastics, and according to Amy L. Brooks, she's an engineer at the University of Georgia College, this new policy will displace 111 million metric tons of plastic worldwide by 2030. That's a lot of plastic that does not have a home or a solution. KW Plastics is a company that is kind of working towards trying to help with this problem. They call themselves the largest high-density polyethylene and polypropylene recyclers in the world. They process about 450,000 metric tons of material annually, and basically their solution right now is to buy these low-quality bales that is usually sent to China to prevent them from being shipped overseas and process them in the US. It's a solution. It's not the greatest, but it is an effort in the right direction. Hopefully other companies will kind of take notice and maybe do the same, or we create better solutions for this problem. Some quick solutions right now is to install better equipment to sort waste efficiently and cheaper, to improve the recycling system, to be able to handle more plastics easier, to ban single-use plastic like straws, cutlery, polystyrene, foam containers, just to make the recycling process easier and quicker, and if we don't use them, we don't have to recycle them. Another big thing, and probably the most important, and is something that everyone can do, is to reduce and reuse before recycling, and to always remember that recycling is the third R. And so if you can reduce the amount that you're using and reuse what you are using, then we won't have to worry about recycling as much. The Ocean Conservancy stated that they want to work with industry towards 100% reusable, recyclable, or where viable alternatives do not exist, recoverable plastics by 2030. They want to look more towards energy recovery to tackle the ocean waste around the globe, especially in Southeast Asia. The picture below is a picture of one of the beaches in Southeast Asia, and as you can see, there's a lot of trash and a lot of plastics that are just sitting there and that have washed up from being in the ocean. They're wanting to create an industry that basically is 100% reusable. We don't have to get any new material, and that all the material that's being used is from recycled material.